Welcome to HOA Storytime Central. The HOA wanted control, not safety. I am standing in my driveway in Anchorage, Alaska, at 7 in the morning, holding a folding table and a thermos of hot cocoa, and a woman I have never met is screaming at me that I am hosting an unauthorized event. The fine, she says, is $800, effective immediately, and if I do not dismantle my setup within 10 minutes, she will have my car towed. Her name is Jennifer Brown. She is the Special Assessment Coordinator for the Northwind Meadows Commons Association, and she is holding a foam clipboard pad so her pen works in the cold. I am Jake. I am an EMT dispatcher. I just moved here 3 weeks ago because the job pays well and I wanted a fresh start. I cannot afford to lose this place. I cannot afford to get dragged into court. And I definitely cannot afford an $800 fine for a folding table. Jennifer is standing 3 feet away from me in a white puffer coat and gray earmuffs, aiming a handheld infrared thermometer at my sidewalk like it is a radar gun. She says the cocoa table violates the Community Gathering Ordinance, the unapproved structure policy, and the emergency snow access rule. I ask her what emergency snow access rule. She says, "This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive." I fold the table. I pick up the thermos. I go inside. I think that is the end of it. It is not the end of it. 2 hours later, I get a notice taped to my door. It says I failed to comply with a verbal warning, and my account is now flagged for escalation review. The notice is printed on Northwind Meadows Commons Association letterhead, with no readable text visible on the actual document in my hand, but the gist is clear. I owe $800, due within 48 hours, or my case file closes and the association will proceed with collections and a lien. I call the management company. The woman on the phone says Jennifer Brown submitted a compliance report at 7:15 this morning, and the report includes timestamps, photos, and a witness statement. I ask what witness. She says she cannot disclose that. I ask for a copy of the photos. She says I can request them in writing, but the dispute file closes in 48 hours unless I pay the fines, so I should probably just pay. I do not pay. I am not paying $800 for a folding table. I go back outside and look at my driveway. There is no damage. There is no obstruction. There is a small patch of ice near the curb where the plow pushed slush yesterday, but I salted it this morning before I even set up the table. I take photos. I take a video. I measure the distance from the table location to the curb. I document everything. Then I go to work. My job is dispatching emergency medical calls. I cannot miss shifts. I cannot afford to get distracted. But every time my phone buzzes, I think it is another notice. At 2 in the afternoon, it buzzes. It is another notice. This one says the association requires proof of my snow removal compliance in a format they never mentioned until today. A contractor invoice with a licensed vendor name, a dated photo log with GPS metadata, and a signed affidavit from a neighbor confirming I shoveled within 6 hours of the last snowfall. I have been shoveling myself. I do not have a contractor. I do not have an affidavit. I do not have GPS metadata because I did not know I needed it. I call the management company again. Different woman. Same script. She says the proof requirement is standard for flagged accounts, and if I cannot provide it, the fines increase to $1,200. I ask when the proof requirement became standard. She says it has always been standard. I say I never received a welcome packet. She says all residents receive a welcome packet. I say I did not receive one. She says she will make a note. She hangs up. I go home after my shift. There is a tow truck circling my street. It is a white flatbed with yellow lights, and it is moving slow, like a shark. I park in my driveway and watch it pass. It passes 3 times in 10 minutes. The driver does not stop, but he looks at my car every time. I go inside. I look up the Northwind Meadows Commons Association online. The website is clean and professional. It lists the board members. Jennifer Brown is not on the board. She is listed under Staff, Special Assessment Coordinator. I click on the Rules section. There is a document library. I download the snow removal policy. It is 8 pages long. Nowhere does it mention contractor invoices, GPS metadata, or neighbor affidavits. Nowhere does it mention a community gathering ordinance. I download the architectural guidelines. Page 4 mentions unapproved structures. The definition is vague. Any addition, fixture, or installation not pre-approved by the board. A folding table is not an addition. It is not a fixture. It is not an installation. I take screenshots. I save everything. I get another notice the next morning. This one is hand-delivered. I open the door, and there is a man in a reflective vest standing on my porch. He hands me an envelope and walks away without saying anything. Inside the envelope is a letter. It says a vendor has been authorized to address a safety hazard on my property, and the work will be completed within 24 hours at my expense. The cost is $400. The hazard is not specified. I go outside. I look around. I do not see a hazard. I call the management company. Third woman. She says the vendor was dispatched this morning based on Jennifer Brown's report. I ask what report. She says she cannot disclose that. I ask what safety hazard. She says she cannot disclose that. I ask for the vendor's contact information. She says the vendor will contact me directly. She hangs up. The vendor shows up at 4 in the afternoon. It is a guy in a red jacket with a snowblower. He says he is here to clear the ice patch near my curb. I say I already salted it. He says Jennifer Brown reported it as a slip hazard and the association authorized him to clear it. I say I do not want it cleared. He says the work order is mandatory. I say I am not paying for it. He says the bill goes to my account either way. He starts the snowblower. I step in front of it. I say if he touches my property without my permission, I am calling the police. He turns off the snowblower. He pulls out his phone. He calls someone. He says, "Yeah, the guy is refusing access." He listens. He says, "Okay." He hangs up. He says his supervisor told him to leave. He loads the snowblower into his truck and drives away. I take photos of the truck, the license plate, and the untouched ice patch. Then I call a friend who works in property law. Her name is Megan. She is a paralegal. She listens to the whole story and then she says, "You need to file a records request right now." I ask what kind of records. She says everything: meeting minutes, vendor contracts, enforcement logs, budget reports, and Jennifer Brown's employment agreement. She says if the HOA is hitting you this hard this fast, there is something wrong with the process, and you need to find out what it is before they bury you. She emails me a template. I fill it out. I submit it through the association's online portal. The confirmation says I will receive a response within 10 business days. I do not have 10 business days. My dispute file closes in 36 hours. I go to work. I dispatch calls. I send units. I do my job. My phone buzzes. Another notice. This one says my car is parked in violation of the Snow Emergency Vehicle Code, and if I do not move it within 2 hours, it will be towed. I look at the notice, It is dated today. It is timestamped 11:30 a.m. I was at work. My car was in my driveway. There is no snow emergency vehicle code in the Northwind Meadows Commons Association rules. I checked. I call the management company. Fourth woman. She says Jennifer Brown filed a snow emergency declaration this morning, and all vehicles must be moved to designated overflow parking. I ask where the overflow parking is. She says it is listed in the Emergency Procedures Appendix. I ask for a copy. She says it is available on the website. I check the website. There is no Emergency Procedures Appendix. I call back. Voicemail. I leave a message. No one calls back. I get home at 8 p.m. The tow truck is parked across the street. The driver is sitting in the cab, watching my driveway. I park. I go inside. I watch through the window. The driver does not move. At 9 p.m., he gets out. He walks up my driveway. He takes photos of my car. He walks back to the truck. He sits. I grab my phone. I film him. At 9:30, he gets out again. He walks up to my car. He kneels down. He puts something under the front tire. It is a boot. I open the door and yell, "What are you doing?" He says, "Compliance hold, ordered by the association." I say, "You cannot boot my car on my own property." He says, "Yes, I can. It is in the tow agreement." I say, "I never signed a tow agreement." He says, "It is part of your HOA covenant." I walk up to him. I film his face. I say, "If you do not remove that boot right now, I am calling the police." He stands up. He says, "Go ahead." I call the police. The officer who shows up is a woman in her 40s. She listens to both sides. She asks the driver for the work order. He shows her a printed page with no readable text. She asks me for the HOA covenant. I show her the rules I downloaded. She reads them. She says, "I do not see anything in here about vehicle boots." The driver says, "It is in the snow emergency addendum." She says, "Do you have a copy?" He says, "The association has it." She looks at me. She says, "Do you have a copy?" I say, "No, I have never seen it." She looks at the driver. She says, "I am going to need you to remove the boot until this gets sorted out." He says, "The association is going to be pissed." She says, "I do not care. Remove the boot." He removes it. He loads it into his truck. He drives away. The officer gives me her card. She says, "If he comes back, call me directly." I thank her. She leaves. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. I do not sleep. I spend the night building a timeline. I list every interaction, every notice, every phone call, every threat. I match them to the rules I downloaded. None of it lines up. The cocoa table is not a violation. The contractor invoice requirement is not in the policy. The snow emergency declaration is not real. The vendor authorization is not documented. The boot is not legal. I screenshot everything. I save it in 3 places. Then I draft an email to the management company with all the evidence attached. I say I am requesting an emergency hearing, and I am filing a formal complaint about selective enforcement, procedural violations, and harassment. I hit send at 6 a.m. I get a reply at 6:15. It is from Jennifer Brown. It says, "Your complaint has been noted. However, your dispute file closed at midnight due to non-payment. All outstanding fines are now in collections, and the association will proceed with a lien. If you wish to contest this, you may file an appeal within 30 days, but the appeal fee is $500 and does not halt collections." I read it twice. I call Megan. She says, "They are trying to bury you in process. You need to escalate this outside the HOA. File a complaint with the city, file a complaint with the state, and get a lawyer consult today." I say, "I cannot afford a lawyer." She says, "A lot of property attorneys do free consults, and some will take HOA cases on contingency if the association is clearly in the wrong." Call around. I call 6 attorneys. 4 do not call back. 1 says he does not take HOA cases. The 6th one says he will meet me today at noon. His name is Paul. His office is in a strip mall near the airport. I drive there during my lunch break. He listens to my story. He asks for the timeline. I show him. He asks for the downloaded rules. I show him. He asks for the notices. I show him. He leans back. He says, "This is a textbook case of procedural abuse." The problem is, HOAs have a lot of leeway in Alaska, and unless you can prove malice or fraud, it is hard to get a court to intervene quickly. I ask what counts as fraud. He says falsified records, misappropriated funds, or enforcement actions that violate the association's own governing documents. I say, all of those things are happening. He says, then you need to prove it. Get the records. If they refuse, file a public records complaint with the city. If the records show what you think they show, we can file in small claims and possibly get an injunction. I ask how long that takes. He says, weeks, maybe months. I say, I do not have weeks. He says, then you need to move faster. Get the records today. I go back to work. I submit another records request. I mark it urgent. I attach Paul's business card as proof of legal representation. I get an auto reply that says requests are processed in the order received. I call the management company. 5th woman. I say, I need the records today. She says, we do not expedite requests. I say, I have an attorney. She says, that is fine, but we still do not expedite requests. I say, I am filing a public records complaint. She says that is your right. She hangs up. I file the complaint. The city clerk's office says they will review it within 5 business days. I do not have 5 business days. I get home and there is another notice on my door. This one says a special board meeting has been scheduled for tomorrow night at 7 p.m. to discuss my account. Attendance is mandatory. Failure to attend will result in a default judgment and immediate lien filing. I text Megan. She says, go to the meeting, bring everything, record it if you can. I say, what if they kick me out? She says, then you have proof of retaliation. I ask if she will come with me. She says, I cannot. I have a conflict, but I will prep you. Call me tonight. I call her at 9. She walks me through what to expect. She says, they are going to try to intimidate you. They are going to say you are in breach. They are going to threaten you with legal action. Do not argue. Do not yell. Just state the facts, ask for the records, and if they refuse, leave and file in court the next day. I say, what if they ambush me with new charges? She says, do not agree to anything. Do not sign anything. Just listen and take notes. I say, Okay. She says, "You are going to be fine." I do not feel fine. The next day, I go to work. I dispatch calls. I send units. I check my phone every 10 minutes. No new notices. No new emails. At 6:30, I drive to the association office. It is in a small building near the entrance to the neighborhood. The parking lot is empty except for 2 cars. I park. I go inside. There is a receptionist. She says, "Are you Jake?" I say yes. She says, "The board is waiting for you." She points to a door. I open it. There is a conference table. There are 3 people sitting on one side, a man in his 60s, a woman in her 50s, and Jennifer Brown. Jennifer is at the head of the table. She has her foam clipboard. She has her infrared thermometer on the table in front of her. She smiles. She says, "Thank you for coming. Please sit." I sit. The man introduces himself as the board president. The woman introduces herself as the treasurer. Jennifer does not introduce herself. She just stares at me. The president says, "We have reviewed your account, and unfortunately, you are currently in default. You owe $1,200 in fines, $400 in vendor fees, and $500 in appeal processing. The total is $2,100, due immediately. If you cannot pay today, we will proceed with collections and a lien." I say, "I do not owe any of that. None of the charges are valid." Jennifer says, "This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive." The president says, "The charges are documented. If you dispute them, you need to file a formal appeal." I say, "I tried to file an appeal. I was told the fee is $500. He says, "That is correct." I say, "That is extortion." He says, "That is policy." I say, "Show me the policy." He looks at Jennifer. Jennifer opens a binder. She flips through pages. She does not show me anything. She says, "The policy is in Section 12 of the Enforcement Procedures Manual." I say, "I never received the manual." She says, "All residents receive the manual." I say, "I did not." She says, "That is not our problem." I pull out my phone. I say, "I am recording this." Jennifer says, "You cannot record this meeting." I say, "Alaska is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I am part of." She looks at the president. He says, "We prefer that you do not." I say, "I am recording." Jennifer stands up. She says, "If you continue to record, we will end this meeting and proceed with the lien." I say, "Then proceed." She sits down. She is pissed. The treasurer says, "Perhaps we can find a compromise." I say, "I do not need a compromise. I need the charges dropped." She says, "The board does not have the authority to drop charges once they are filed." I say, "Who filed them?" She looks at Jennifer. Jennifer says, "I did." I say, "On what basis?" She says, "On the basis of multiple documented violations." I say, "Show me the documentation." She says, "I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes." I stop. I pull out my laptop. I open the timeline. I turn the screen toward them. I say, "Here is every notice I received, every phone call I made, and every rule I checked. None of your charges match the governing documents. The cocoa table is not a violation. The contractor requirement is not in the policy. The snow emergency is fake. The vendor authorization is not documented. The boot was illegal. You are making this up as you go." Jennifer says, "That is a serious accusation." I say, "Prove me wrong. Show me the records." The president says, "We do not have to show you anything." I say, "Yes, you do." Alaska law requires HOAs to provide records within 10 business days of a written request. I filed 2 requests. "You have not responded." He says, "We are processing your request." I say, "It has been 4 days." He says, "We will respond within the required time frame." I say, "That is not good enough. I am filing a public records complaint with the city, and I am filing a lawsuit in small claims for harassment, procedural abuse, and illegal enforcement." Jennifer stands up again. She says, "If you file a lawsuit, we will countersue for defamation and frivolous litigation." I say, "Go ahead. I have everything documented." She says, "You have nothing." I say, "I have witness statements, photos, recordings, and your own notices." She says, "None of that matters." The board has discretion. I say, "Discretion is not a license to lie." She slams her hand on the table. She says, "You do not get to talk to me like that." I say, "You do not get to fine me for a folding table." She says, "It was an unapproved event." I say, "It was hot cocoa." She says, "It was a gathering." I say, "I was alone." She says, "You were creating a public nuisance." I say, "No one complained." She says, "I complained." I say, "You do not live here." She freezes. The room goes quiet. The president says, "Jennifer is an employee. She has the authority to enforce the rules." I say, "Does she have the authority to invent them?" He does not answer. I say, "I want the records. All of them. Meeting minutes, vendor contracts, enforcement logs, budget reports, and Jennifer Brown's employment agreement. I want to see how many other people she has done this to." The treasurer says, "That is a very broad request." I say, "Then, narrow it down. Show me the enforcement log for the last 6 months. Show me how many people were fined for snow violations. Show me how many of those fines were collected." The president says, "We are not going to do that." I say, "Then I am filing in court tomorrow." Jennifer says, "You cannot afford a lawyer." I say, "I do not need one. Small claims does not require an attorney." She says, "You will lose." I say, "We will see." I stand up. I close my laptop. I say, "You have 24 hours to provide the records or drop the charges. If you do neither, I will see you in court." I walk out. No one follows me. I get in my car. My hands are shaking. I drive home. I call Megan. I tell her what happened. She says, "You did great. Now file the lawsuit tonight so they cannot blindside you." I say, "How do I do that?" She says, "Go to the courthouse website. Download the small claims form. Fill it out. List every charge and every procedural violation. Attach the timeline and the downloaded rules. File it online. The fee is about $100. I say, "I can do that." She says, "Do it now." I hang up. I do it. The confirmation email arrives at 11 p.m. The hearing is scheduled in 3 weeks. I forward the confirmation to the management company. I forward it to Jennifer Brown. I forward it to Paul. Paul replies within 5 minutes. He says, "Good work. Let me know if they contact you. If they do not, we will proceed with discovery." I do not know what discovery is. I Google it. It means I can force them to produce the records even if they do not want to. I feel better. I sleep. The next morning, I get an email from the management company. It says the association has decided to postpone collections pending the outcome of the lawsuit. The fines are still on my account, but they will not pursue a lien until the court rules. I forward it to Paul. He says, "That means they are scared. Keep the pressure on." I say, "How?" He says, "File a motion for the records. I will draft it. Send me the request you submitted." I send it. He sends back a motion 2 hours later. I file it. The court schedules a hearing for next week. The motion says the association must produce all requested records within 7 days or face sanctions. I forward it to the management company. No reply. I go to work. I dispatch calls. I send units. I do my job. At 3 p.m. I get a call from a number I do not recognize. I answer. It is a man. He says, "Is this Jake?" I say, "Yes." He says, "My name is Tom. I am on the Northwind Meadows board. I heard about your lawsuit. I want to talk." I say, "About what?" He says, "About Jennifer." I say, "What about her?" He says, "Can we meet?" I say, "When?" He says, "Tonight." I say, "Where?" He says, "There is a coffee shop near the courthouse. I will be there at 7. I say, "Okay." He hangs up. I text Megan. I tell her about the call. She says, "Be careful. It could be a setup." I say, "What kind of setup?" She says, "They might try to get you to say something they can use against you." Record the conversation. Do not agree to anything. Just listen. I say, "Okay." She says, "And text me when you are done." I say, "I will." I meet Tom at 7. He is a man in his 50s with gray hair and a tired face. He orders coffee. I order coffee. We sit. He says, "I am not supposed to be talking to you." I say, "Then why are you?" He says, "Because what Jennifer is doing is wrong." I say, "What is she doing?" He says, "She is using the enforcement process as a weapon. She targets new residents, hits them with bogus charges, and collects fines before they figure out the rules. The board knows. We have known for a while. But she is good at covering her tracks, and the president does not want to deal with it." I say, "Why not?" He says, "Because she brings in money. The fines go into the general fund, and the budget is tight. If we fire her, we lose the revenue." I say, "That is insane." He says, "That is HOAs. I say, "Can you testify?" He says, "Maybe." I need to think about it. If I do, I will lose my seat on the board. I say, "Is that worse than letting her keep doing this?" He does not answer. I say, "How many people has she done this to?" He says, "I do not know exactly. At least a dozen in the last year. Most of them paid. A few fought back, but they did not have the evidence. You are the first one who documented everything." I say, "What happens if I win?" He says, "The board will probably settle. They do not want this going public." I say, "What if I do not settle?" He says, "Then you might get everything you are asking for, but you will make enemies." I say, "I already have enemies." He says, "Fair enough." He finishes his coffee. He says, "I will think about testifying. If I do, I will let you know." He leaves. I text Megan. I tell her what he said. She says, "That is huge. If he testifies, you have an insider witness. That changes everything." I say, "He did not commit." She says, "Keep following up. He is scared, but he is also pissed. That is a good combination." I say, "Okay." She says, "How are you holding up?" I say, "I am tired." She says, "Hang in there. You are almost done." I say, "I hope so." The records hearing is in 3 days. I spend the time prepping. I print the timeline. I print the notices. I print the rules. I print the emails. I organize everything into a binder. Paul calls me the night before. He says, "Tomorrow is going to be quick. The judge will ask the association why they have not produced the records. They will either produce them or they will not. If they do not, the judge will order them to, and if they still refuse, the judge can hold them in contempt." I say, "What if they produce fake records?" He says, "Then we challenge them." I say, "How?" He says, "We cross-check them against what you already have. If the dates do not match, if the numbers do not match, if the procedures do not match, we point it out. The judge will notice." I say, "Okay." He says, "Get some sleep." I say, "I will try." I do not sleep. I go to the courthouse at 8 a.m. The hearing is at 9. I sit in the hallway. Paul shows up at 8:30. He says, "Ready?" I say, "As ready as I can be." He says, "Just follow my lead." The association attorney shows up at 8:45. She is a woman in her 30s in a gray suit. She does not look at me. She talks to Paul. He talks back. They are polite but cold. At 9, the bailiff calls us in. The judge is a man in his 60s. He looks bored. He says, "This is a motion to compel records. Counsel, please state your position." Paul says, "Your Honor, the plaintiff submitted a records request on this date, and the defendant association has not responded. Under Alaska law, they are required to respond within 10 business days. It has been 12. The judge looks at the association attorney. He says, "Why have you not responded?" She says, "Your Honor, we are in the process of compiling the records. Some of them are archived, and it is taking time." The judge says, "How much time?" She says, "We expect to have them ready within 2 weeks." Paul says, "Your Honor, that is unacceptable. The plaintiff has a small claims hearing in 2 weeks, and he needs the records to prepare his case." The judge says, "I agree. I am ordering the defendant to produce all requested records within 7 days. If they do not, I will impose sanctions." The attorney says, "Your Honor, 7 days is not enough time." The judge says, "Then you should have started sooner." Motion granted. We are adjourned. We walk out. Paul says, "That went well." I say, "They are going to drag it out." He says, "Probably. But now they are on a deadline, and if they miss it, the judge will be annoyed." That helps us. I say, "Okay." He says, "Go home. Wait for the records. When you get them, send them to me immediately. I will review them." I say, "What if they do not send them?" He says, "Then we go back to court, and the judge holds them in contempt." That is not a good look for an HOA. They will send them. I say, "I hope you are right." 4 days later, I get an email. It has a zip file attached. The file is labeled Records Request Response. I download it. I open it. There are 43 PDFs. I start reading. Meeting minutes. Vendor contracts. Enforcement logs. Budget reports. Jennifer Brown's employment agreement. I read for 2 hours. Then I call Paul. I say, "You need to see this." He says, "What did you find?" I say, "Everything." The meeting minutes show the board voted to increase enforcement targets 3 months ago. The vendor contracts show Jennifer is getting kickbacks from the snow removal company. The enforcement logs show she has fined 20 people in the last 6 months, and 18 of them paid without appealing. The budget reports show the fines went into a discretionary fund that the board used for landscaping upgrades. Jennifer's employment agreement includes a performance bonus tied to fine collection. Paul says, "Send me everything." I send it. He calls back an hour later. He says, "This is fraud. This is embezzlement. This is racketeering." I say, "What do we do?" He says, "We file an amended complaint, and we notify the state attorney general." This is not just an HOA dispute anymore. This is criminal. I file the amended complaint the next day. The new complaint includes wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. I attach the records. I attach the timeline. I attach the emails. I file it with the court. I file it with the state attorney general. I file it with the city clerk. I send copies to the management company, the board president, and Jennifer Brown. I do not hear back from anyone for 2 days. On the 3rd day, I get a call from the association attorney. She says, "We would like to settle." I say, "I am listening." She says, "The association will drop all charges, refund any fees you paid, and agree to a neutral third-party audit of the enforcement process. In exchange, you agree to drop the lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement." I say no. She says, "Excuse me?" I say, "I am not signing an NDA. I want the records public. I want Jennifer Brown fired. I want the board to adopt a clear snow policy with a neutral appeal process and proof standards. And I want my legal fees." She says, "That is not reasonable." I say, "It is more reasonable than what you did to me." She says, "We will see you in court." She hangs up. The small claims hearing is in 5 days. I spend the time prepping with Paul. He says, "The judge is going to focus on the procedural violations. The fraud stuff will come later if the Attorney General picks it up. For now, we need to prove the association violated its own rules and harassed you in bad faith." I say, "I can prove that." He says, "I know. But we need to make it simple. The judge has 20 minutes. We need to walk in, lay out the timeline, show the contradictions, and ask for relief." I say, "What relief?" He says, "Drop the charges, refund your fees, pay your legal costs, and adopt the new policy." I say, "What if they refuse?" He says, "Then the judge orders it. That is what small claims is for." I say, "Okay." The hearing is on a Friday. I take the day off work. I meet Paul at the courthouse at 8:30. We go over the plan one more time. At 9, we go in. The judge is the same man from the records hearing. He recognizes me. He says, "Back again?" I say, "Yes, Your Honor." He says, "Let us make this quick." The association attorney is already there. She does not look happy. The judge says, "Plaintiff, state your case." Paul stands up. He says, "Your Honor, the plaintiff was fined $2,100 for violations that do not exist in the association's governing documents. He was threatened with towing, had his car booted illegally, and was subjected to a vendor authorization he did not consent to. The association has refused to provide a clear appeal process, demanded proof in a format not specified in the rules, and retaliated against him for requesting records. We are asking the court to drop all charges, refund any fees, and order the association to adopt a clear enforcement policy with neutral oversight. The judge says, "Do you have evidence?" Paul says, "Yes, Your Honor." He hands the judge the binder. The judge flips through it. He stops on the enforcement log. He says, "Is this accurate?" Paul says, "Yes, Your Honor." Those are the association's own records. The judge looks at the association attorney. He says, "Do you dispute this?" She says, "Your Honor." The enforcement log reflects our standard procedures. The judge says, "Your standard procedures include fining people for folding tables?" She says, "The plaintiff was hosting an unapproved event." The judge says, "According to this log, he was alone." She does not answer. The judge says, "What about the boot?" She says, "The boot was authorized under the snow emergency provision." The judge says, "Show me the provision." She opens her file. She flips through pages. She does not show him anything. The judge says, "I am waiting." She says, "The provision is in the supplemental addendum." The judge says, "Which you have not provided." She says, "We are working on it." The judge says, "You have had 2 weeks." He closes the binder. He says, "I am ruling for the plaintiff." All charges are dropped. The association will refund any fees paid and reimburse the plaintiff for his legal costs. The association is also ordered to adopt a clear snow enforcement policy with a neutral appeal process and proof standards within 30 days. If the association fails to comply, I will hold the board in contempt. The attorney says, "Your Honor, we request time to appeal." The judge says, "You can appeal, but my order stands." We are adjourned. We walk out. Paul says, "You won." I say, "Did I?" He says, "Yes. The charges are gone. Your fees are refunded. They have to change the policy." That is everything you asked for. I say, "What about Jennifer?" He says, "That is up to the board and the Attorney General. But I would be surprised if she is still employed next month." I say, "Good." He says, "You should feel proud. You fought an HOA and won. That does not happen often." I say, "It should happen more." He says, "I agree." He shakes my hand. He says, "If you need anything else, let me know." I say, "Thank you." He leaves. I go home. I check my email. There is a message from Tom. It says, "I heard about the hearing. Congratulations. I am testifying. I am done protecting her." I reply, "Thank you. I appreciate it." He does not reply. I sit on my couch. I look at the timeline. I look at the binder. I think about the last 3 weeks. I think about the folding table. I think about the cocoa. I think about Jennifer Brown and her foam clipboard and her infrared thermometer. I let her call my bluff, because she did not realize I was not bluffing. 2 weeks later, I get another email. It is from the management company. It says, "Jennifer Brown is no longer employed by the Northwind Meadows Commons Association. The board has voted to adopt a new enforcement policy with a neutral third-party review process. All outstanding fines from the last 6 months are under review. If you believe you were improperly charged, you may submit a dispute within 30 days. I forward the email to Paul. He says, "It is over. You did it." I say, "It does not feel over." He says, "It never does. But you won. That is what matters." I say, "I guess." A month later, I get a letter in the mail. It is from the State Attorney General. It says they are opening an investigation into the Northwind Meadows Commons Association for financial misconduct. They are requesting my cooperation. I call Paul. He says, "This is the big one. If they find what we think they will find, the board could face criminal charges." I say, "Good." He says, "Are you willing to testify?" I say, "Absolutely." He says, "Then we are going all the way." I say, "Let us do it." The investigation takes 4 months. I give them everything. The timeline, the binder, the recordings, the emails. I testify twice. Tom testifies. The snow removal vendor testifies. The tow truck driver testifies. In the end, the Attorney General files charges against Jennifer Brown and 2 board members for wire fraud and embezzlement. The case goes to trial. I do not attend. Paul keeps me updated. He says the defense is trying to argue the fines were legitimate. He says the jury is not buying it. He says the evidence is overwhelming. 2 weeks later, Paul calls. He says, "Guilty on all counts." Jennifer Brown is facing 3 years. The board members are facing probation and restitution. The association is being forced to pay back every fine collected in the last 2 years. I say, "How much is that?" He says, "Over $80,000. I say, "Wow." He says, "Yeah. You did this. You started this." I say, "I just wanted my cocoa table." He laughs. He says, "And you got it. Plus a lot more." I say, "I guess I did." I am still living in Anchorage. I am still dispatching calls. I am still shoveling my driveway. The HOA is different now. The new board is quiet. The new enforcement policy is clear. No one bothers me about folding tables or hot cocoa. I see Tom sometimes. He waves. I wave back. I never see Jennifer Brown. I heard she moved out of state. I do not know if that is true. I do not care. Last week, I was shoveling my driveway. A neighbor walked by. She said, "Are you the guy who sued the HOA?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Thank you." I said, "For what?" She said, "They tried to fine me for a wreath. I appealed using the new policy. They dropped it." I said, "Good." She said, "You changed things." I said, "I just did not want to pay for a folding table." She said, "Well, it worked." She walked away. I kept shoveling. A few days ago, I got one more email. It is from the management company. It says there is a special board meeting next week. The topic is a motion to formally apologize to all residents who were improperly fined during the enforcement period. The motion is expected to pass. I am invited to attend. I reply, "I will be there." The meeting is tonight. I am going. I am bringing the binder. I am bringing the timeline. I am not bringing the thermos of cocoa, but I am thinking about it. I want to see their faces. I want to hear the apology. I want to watch them admit they were wrong. And then I want to go home, make myself some cocoa, and sit at my folding table in my driveway. Because I can. Because that is what winning looks like. Not revenge, not destruction. Just the right to live in peace without someone inventing rules to steal your money. Just the right to shovel your driveway, drink your cocoa, and not get harassed for it. Just the right to fight back when someone tries to bury you in paperwork and lies. I fought. I won. And I am still here. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.